Wow. Well, thank you very much. This is a fabulous honor. I'm not a film scholar. I'm a popcorn salesman. It's a great honor to be here. I love the work that the LA Conservancy does in preserving Los Angeles culture, and it's just great to be here. I assumed that if I was going to be asked to be an MC for one of these screenings, it would be a Universal horror film, because there's a little bit of family connection to that, and anyway, I feel a little bit like a the Invisible Man sometimes. But when I was told that the Conservancy was going to be honoring Preston Sturges, it was just love at first sight, because I am in fact, if not a scholar to be certain, but a fan of Preston Sturges. When my wife and I first started dating, she asked me who was my favorite filmmaker, and she was expecting probably the answer of, Francois Truffaut or Akira Kurosawa, some foreign language director, which was often associated with Laemmle theaters. And I said, Preston Sturges and Sullivan Travels is my favorite film of all time. She was a little bit shocked. She's more shocked because I change, and every once in a while I say, well, you know what, I really love the Palm Beach Story too, because it's just so brilliant. I'm supposed to love Sullivan's Travels, but I really love the Palm Beach Story. But I also really love The Lady Eve. In fact, I probably fell in love with Sturges in a situation somewhat like this. I don't know how many people here in the audience have had the opportunity to see classic Hollywood films in a movie theater. How many people here have seen a Preston Sturges film in a movie theater? All right, well, that's terrific. I came from a generation that still had an opportunity to experience repertory cinema in movie theaters before VHS, DVD, and all those other things killed it off. I'm a great fan of the fact that people today can access film at the touch of their fingers, but seeing a classic Hollywood film in a movie theater, any classic film in a movie theater, is an experience that I think is worthwhile. So thank you all for being here tonight to see this film. If you've seen The Lady Eve, but you haven't seen it in a movie theater, then you haven't seen The Lady Eve. You're going to be able to share the experience tonight with an audience. That's the way movies were meant to be seen. That's why I do what I do. That's why my family continues to believe that movie theaters are going to exist, on into the future. I think we really crave this opportunity to come together as a community and experience cinema together. So, again, my thanks to Linda Dishman, my thanks to everyone at the LA Conservancy for putting this series on. My thanks to them for finally scheduling a film by Preston Sturges. They're not alone in not recognizing his brilliance. When the AFI first put together their list of the 100 greatest films of all time, I was deeply offended by the fact that not a single film by Preston Sturges was on the list of the 100 greatest films of all time. What is this creative amnesia of Hollywood? But to their credit, when they did the 100 greatest comedies of all time, 4 films by Preston Sturges were included on the list, and well deservedly included. Yeah, I think of Sturges. Well, I'm a Dodger fan, as I said. Anyone know the score, by the way, tonight? So Preston Sturges is like the Sandy Koufax of film directors. He didn't have the longest career, but for a short period of time, he was unhittable. He threw one great screwball after another. In 5 years, from 1939 to 1944, Preston Sturges wrote and directed The Great McGinty, Christmas in July, The Lady Eve, Sullivan's Travels, The Palm Beach Story, The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, and Hail the Conquering Hero. 3 Academy Award nominations, 1 Academy Award win, and 4 of the greatest comedies of all time. So you're about to see something that really needs to be seen. I can't wait for the Conservancy to screen The Palm Beach Story because I want to see it with an audience. All right? We'll make that happen. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure to join me on the stage two of Preston Sturges' sons, Preston Sturges and Tom Sturges. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good start.
All right. It's all right? It's good? We're ready?
Check.
Check.
1, 2. Good evening.
Thank you both for being here. I imagine it's a little bittersweet. You both were very young when your father passed away. Preston, you were 6. Tom, you were 3. Talk about some early memories, perhaps.
I just have a few, and I have probably lots of memories that people suggest I have, and I try to remember them. I don't remember many. I remember one time being in Paris with him, and he took me down to the Seine, and he asked me if I wanted an oyster. And I did. I ate it, and he asked me, did I want a second? And I said no.
It's a Jonathan Swift moment.
That's a significant portion of my memories.
Mm-hmm.
I know for myself because I mean, if anybody who's had a 3-year-old, they remember nothing. So all the love and time and attention, it's like fuel lifting the rocket off the earth. They really don't remember it later. So my memories and my knowledge that I gained from my father, I gained from watching his films and found out about men and women and found out about humor and found out about his philosophies, but primarily from the films that he made.
I would have to agree, and his kindness and his compassion for every one of his characters in his movies, even the small parts, they were real people.
I also think that one of the things that he must have loved women is my thought, and he must have loved.
Oh, absolutely.
Aside from the 4 marriages.
We'll get to that.
But so many of his films, there's a bunch of men circling around a very, very intelligent woman who controls the strings like a puppeteer. And certainly the Lady Eve is one of the best examples of that.
Absolutely. Did your mom share any particular memories?
Well, my mom was completely in love with my dad, and at least that's the story we got. I mean, and he was the greatest guy ever. I mean, but they had a wonderful romance, and he was, I think he was 50 and she was 21 when he got that together. And my compliments to him and my eternal thanks.
But there's a cute story you had mentioned earlier. One of you had mentioned earlier that sort of has an echo in one of your dad's films about your mom and your dad meeting for the first time at the restaurant. That I think Preston, you had mentioned that to me.
Yes, my father was building his place on Sunset Strip, which was called The Players, and he liked to get hands-on. He was in there in a T-shirt, directing, but getting dirty. And my mother was a nursing student and passed him every day as he did this, and he noticed her, and eventually he introduced himself, and he said, my name is Preston Sturges. She goes, oh, hi, Preston. She had no idea who he was.
He was. She said the story that he was waiting. He had that pause after he said his name that famous people usually do. Yes, my name is Preston Sturges. And got absolutely nothing back because she was too young. She hadn't even seen any of his movies.
But I see in that somewhat of an echo of Veronica Lake meeting Joel McCrea for the first time in Sullivan's Travels when Sullivan is in. So is this an example of life imitating art or art imitating life?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, he loved a pretty girl. My mom happened to be a sensationally beautiful woman. And, you know, what's a 51-year-old man to do when a 20-year-old beauty walks by? Well, how do you do, madam? That's my interpretation of it. I've got no evidence.
Your father was famous for almost, writing. He would shoot a scene, during the day, and then go home and write the next day's, script at night. He was just the pace at which he worked, and sometimes he didn't even necessarily know where the stories were going.
Well, that's particularly the case. That's particularly the case in this film, where there was a lot of rewriting in the evening, and he would do that. I know that about two films, about Miracle of Morgan's Creek and this film, where an idea would come to him, and on the set he had a rule. Eddie Bracken told me that anybody who came up with a laugh got $1. So if you improved the script or a pratfall or knocked somebody over or whatever it was, and it made everybody laugh, you got an extra $1, and he would have to rewrite if that had an effect on the story and continue it through the rest of the script. So yes, it was, and that's why some of these films, this one, it's like jazz. I mean, it's going so fast and with such a tempo that never lets up, because it feels almost improvisatory as you're watching it go by.
I would also mention that, like what Tom was just talking about, that a great director makes use of the happy accident, the unlikely occurrence, and makes use of it. And I think that is part of what made him a great director. And you're going to see a horse later, and you're going to see my pop making very good use of a happy accident.
Well, I mean, he's certainly, your father is famous for having had a stable of actors that he consistently worked with. In fact, the studio hated, in some respects, that he used the same character actors over and over again, because they said, well, people are going to get tired of seeing the same actors in your films.
Well, there was an economic value to that also, another thing I got from Eddie Bracken, and that is if you were a bit player at Paramount and you showed up in a movie, you got paid for that week. The week of the film, right?
Okay.
But if you had a line in the film, you got paid for the duration of the film. So all of his guys, the Great Sturgis Acting Company, as he called it, of which William Demarest was not only his good luck charm, but his #1 guy. And you'll notice that some people come in the movie, they'll have one line. Jimmy Conlon in this movie has eggs and toast, toast and bacon, bacon and eggs, eggs and jam. And that's his only line in the whole movie, but he got paid for, 11 weeks.
Did Sig get paid for coming up with that fake dialogue in Palm Beach Story where he's nits?
Nits, Toto.
He's nits. But to what extent do you think his theater experience? I mean, your father, he's working retail, he's working on Wall Street, he's doing all kinds of other things. He appears in a Broadway show, or maybe not even a Broadway show. He appears on stage. All of a sudden, he's writing for Broadway, But was there something about that theater experience that influenced his working method in cinema? Yeah.
I do think there was, and he worked as a stagehand, and he noticed that from behind the stage, the audience always had one focal point, one person that their attention was on. And I think when we were talking about Sullivan's Travels, there was a scene in which my father was asked to rewrite a scene with Joel McCrea and Veronica Lake. And the word from the studio was the background was too busy. And armed with that knowledge that he had from the theater, he realized that what the real problem was, the foreground, the scene was not interesting enough. So he rewrote that scene, and included something in the background, a dead man hanging in a tree, which is still there and nobody sees it because you're not looking at the background if you're paying attention to the movie.
Joel McCrea is standing right next to his shoes. They're right here. And as a matter of fact, there's a note in the files from the head of the studio complimenting him on having reshot the scene and focused it better than it was before. But there's also, as you mentioned, the theater. My dad grew up in New York in the 20s and maintained a steady presence at the Yiddish Theater, which were a series of theaters, and it was the funniest theater experience he had because and if you notice in a lot of his films, there's a lot of different accents and people. He wasn't looking for just patricians. He wanted people with that accent because he grew up laughing at them when he was coming of age in his early 20s.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Great.
You know, I also think, my father was known for giving his characters really strange names, Cockenlocker.
Huckensacker.
No double meaning there.
And I think the reason he did that is because when a character is given a unique name, when the writer is writing, that name summons that character to mind in a way that Smith does not.
Certainly. When we were talking, I delicately brought up the subject that for me, one of the things that I find most remarkable about your father's films is a degree of sexual frankness and candor that you just, I mean, the screwball comedy at some level is all based about comedy of the sexes. So you think about Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby. You think about Claudette Colbert and Clark Gable in Happened One Night. But I never really felt like those people were, really wanted to desire, to be with each other in a certain way. And yet, certainly when you see, Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda in tonight's film together for the first time, and absolutely when you see Claudette Colbert and Joel McCrea together for the first time, they just can't keep their hands off each other.
Well, I think in this film, I remember seeing it when I was a kid in our living room on Franklin Avenue, and this film is almost like a documentary of a romance. She is so comfortable, and when she sidles up to him and asks her cute, sexy, flirtatious questions, and I'm not going to give away a single line, but you'll hear them and you'll go, oh, whoa. And I mean, that really opened people's eyes because it was so sexual. But there was a hint of innocence, but it was frankly a very sexual performance by both Henry Fonda and Barbara Stanwyck.
Do you have anything to add about that? We maybe just.
So, did
something.
you want to feed this in? So, I'm working on a book. I'm borrowing one of my dad's titles. His autobiography was going to be called "The Events Leading Up to My Death."
That's a good title.
Yeah, that's a good title. So I'm borrowing that.
It's not the eventual name of the book.
No, it didn't come out that way. We went with the other title, which I think was Between Flops. Because between flops, of course, he had his hits. At any rate, I'm working on it, and it's the last 10 years of his life in his letters. And it's his letters to my mom and his letters to other people. And I recently discovered a letter about this film and his own feelings about Barbara Stanwyck, and I mentioned to Greg I'd be happy to share it with you if you guys would like to hear it.
Please.
So I'm going to cut out the dear who it was and yours truly. Barbara Stanwyck was brilliant, gorgeous, street smart, everything I love, and funny. Who doesn't love a funny girl? She was one of the great beauties. If I had been able to figure it out with her, I think we would have ruled Hollywood. I tried many, many times to get us into the same house and the same bed, but found my usually irresistible charms completely resistible. Then one day she told me why. She told me that I had failed her 2-minute test. Apparently, women know within minutes if the man they just met will make a good mate. Some instinct kicks in and decides for her if this specimen could help her procreate the species. Well, not in my case. I told her if I had known there was going to be a test, I would have gotten a couple of books and prepared better. Then she told me it wasn't like a driver's license that you could take in again and again. One shot, that's all you get. I think now that to successfully defeat this test is why man invented hard liquor. But I took my revenge. I wrote a movie for her. Her character was everything she was, beautiful and smart and sexy and still innocent somehow. And I wrote one scene where she said all the things that she would have said to the man who did pass her test. She got it perfectly right on the second take, and that's the one that made it into the film. But we reshot it 3 more times. I couldn't resist. Over and over, I heard her speak the words I wanted her to say to me that she would never say to me. She started to figure out what I was up to. After the 3rd take, she came over to me and said, I know what you're doing.
Wow, that's great. And thank you. Thank you.
Well read.
You discovered, or at some point, you formed a relationship with your father through his work. Each of you. Any comment about a favorite one of his films, or even just a favorite bit? Because believe me, as I said, I have a hard time deciding a favorite film at any point. But is there one little bit that sticks with you? You know, favorite is such a loaded word. So.
I think my favorite little bit is a little part in Sullivan's Travels when Joel McCrea finally figures a way to get out of prison. Now, my father didn't outline things. He just wrote himself into a corner because he knew if he could figure his way out of that corner, it would be a surprise both to him and to his audience. And so when I hear that little part when he goes, I murdered John L. Sullivan, that part, it just fills me with a great joy, and I'm so happy for him.
That he'd figured his way out of that corner.
Well, the thing that I love about that, I mean, I love that question because my favorite changes, as with your children, you know. My favorite.
It's not fair. Only one of them is here tonight.
My favorite child is the one who came with me tonight. I mean, isn't that clear? So for me, my favorite is this film, and I'll tell you why I love this film is that he was in love with the woman he was making the film with. He was at the height of his powers. I think he was 39 or 40 when he wrote and directed this, the first guy to be doing that, playing at the top of his game. And he knew what he had, and I love that. I love that he knew what he had, and he knew what he wanted out of the film and was able to coax it out of his characters down to the very last line, which we won't say.
That's right.
So this is my favorite.
Won't say.
You know, there's a part in Lady Eve, the second where the Lady Eve shows up, and.
Excuse me, can we just have a quick conference?
Don't blow it. Don't blow it. Yeah.
I'm not giving away anything. But I bet everybody here already knows it.
No.
Done. Wait. All right.
Yeah, that's it.
We talked a little bit. You guys both mentioned a little bit about.
All right.
I'm going to wrap up here, but
Wrap it up. Jesus.
yeah, totally wrap it up because we want to.
Same film. They don't want to know.
We talked a little bit about the Famous Fathers Club. And how, you know, you grew up in L.A., granted it's a town without any well, I won't say that. It's a town without memory. So, you know, I think, you know, 5 years after your father died, you know, your Prestonsters, your Chumsters, what does that mean? But you knew at some level, anyway, you're both creative people. You're doing great stuff right now. I don't know if you want to just briefly talk about some of the work that you've got coming up.
You mentioned such an interesting thing, and I know we're wrapping up. I see the guy in the tuxedo over there behind you flapping his arms. But just to point out the sad truth of history, in 1941, the New York Film Critics awarded this film the award as Best Film of the Year. That was ahead of Citizen Kane.
Wow.
And now, a brief 60, 70 years later, one of them is considered the greatest film that ever made, and the other is just a jewel in the sand.
But we're here tonight.
And we're
We
here.
are tonight. That's
So-
right. But Tom, you have a book coming out later in the fall.
If you're kind enough to mention, I have a
Well,
book coming out September 25th.
You're here
called-
tonight. I mean, come on.
A shameless plug. It's a book called Every Idea is a Good Idea. And it's a book about creativity and how to have more of it in your life based on the techniques and guidelines of all the songwriters and artists and producers I've been working with in my career in the music business. So thank you for mentioning
Thank you.
it. September 25th, Every Idea is a Good Idea.
And Preston, you've got some stuff to, besides just recently getting married?
I just got married, and my wife is out there somewhere. Where I got married 11 days ago. The last Mrs. Sturgis is right here.
The eternal optimists.
God,
The most recent, Mrs. Sturgis.
most
Our
recent.
children. Our children.
most recent. God bless you, wherever you are here. I write fiction, and I have a series of books. They're kind of crime fiction. It's the Shortcut Man series. It's some of the best reviewed books in the last couple of years. The reviews have outstripped the audience, but I'm hoping everyone here tonight can go right to Book Soup and change that.
And
Shortcut
the book
Man.
the book is being made into a film.
And it's being made into a
So
film.
60 years from now, we won't be here, but someone like me, is going to
hopefully
be on
there-
this stage introducing that film, and my kids will still be selling popcorn. So
I hope so.
Preston, Tom, it's been a great time. Thank you. You've been a fabulous audience.
you, everybody. Enjoy the movie.
Lady
Thank you.
Eve.
Enjoy the movie.